welcome to another edition of Tuscaloosa Talks. We are here on location with Donnie Lee and Tyler Fezzey, and we're excited to talk about a couple of things, especially an upcoming event on May 22nd that's going to address something that we're all worried about in Tuscaloosa, and that's gun violence. But before we do that, I want to talk about an extraordinary person that I've gotten to know in recent months. Donnie Lee, tell the people at home a little bit about who Donnie Lee is, and then the second part of that is, why is this facility that we're in important, and what are you doing here that's going to make a difference for so many across our community?
For sure. Well, I mean, the main thing is just creating opportunities for kids so that they can realize their dreams. I know that's one of the things that you and I talk about incessantly, right? Is how do we protect the opportunities and just the opportunity for them to compete for their dreams, right? That pursuit of happiness, if you will.
So what's made you want to make that really a mission in your life? Talk about your life and why it's translating into such an amazing thing right here in Tuscaloosa.
For sure. So like yourself, I was a former collegiate athlete, played ball at the University of Florida and then transferred to the University of Alabama. My entire life was just prefaced on finding my value and how good I was at the sport, right? I was a military kid, so we moved around a lot, and every single city that we moved to, I only made friends after the first football practice or after the first basketball practice, right? And so I recognized immediately that, hey, if I can contribute to this team, if I can be in value add to this team, then, they'll love me. That's all I wanted in that quid pro quo exchange. And so as I went through those years, was able to play collegiately. I ended up tearing my ACL August 19th, 2017, about a week before we played Florida State, which was, it was absolutely heartbreaking for me. In my mind, I was like, this is rock bottom. Like, it doesn't get any worse than this. About 2 months later, I was kicked off the team, arrested and kicked off the team, and I immediately knew then, like, it's over. I've got to figure out what I'm going to do next, who I am without the ball, who am I to the community, right? How can I be a value add to the community without being on the football team, right? Without helping us win games. What I recognized once I started working with some of the youth in the community is that a lot of the issues that I had growing up, they had the exact same things, that I wasn't an anomaly in that extent. Love my parents to death. They had their issues just like every marriage does, and so just learning that, hey, well, this is what I took from my parents, this is what I took from my mom and my dad, and then having an opportunity to teach that to this next generation and say, hey, we're all trying to the best of our abilities. This is what we're trying to work to accomplish, and we can use sport as a microcosm to get us to that next level. So to answer your question, just the pain of tearing my ACL, of being dismissed from the football team, of not making it to the NFL, right? I've got a letter that I wrote when I was 9 years old about I was going to buy this for my mom when I made it to the NFL. I was going to play for this team. I was going to do this and do that. And none of those things came to fruition, but I think God has a really amazing way of taking the negative occurrences that we perceive in our lives and using them for positive. And to answer the question, that's what the lab is a way to turn a negative into a positive.
So talk about this facility. What's happening right here that you're making a difference with not only pro athletes, but aspiring athletes right here in Tuscaloosa? For sure.
So I think the reality of it is that if I walk into a gym and there's 100 kids in there in a training session, maybe one of them will make it to the professional ranks, right? But there's an amazing opportunity to lead all the other 99 into just understanding how important it is to do the little things right? How you do one thing is how you do everything, right? If you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late, right? A lot of these Sabanisms that we get from that process. But just teaching them that, hey, the same process, the same methodical process that you utilize for your sport, you can utilize that as well in your business, right? As a father, in your household, in your pursuit, in your relationship with God, whatever it may be, you can utilize the principles that you learned in sport and transcend sport with that. And so our ultimate goal here is to have a 100% conversion rate, right? Every kid that comes to this program, we either want them playing collegiately, going to the military, entering the workforce, whatever it may be. If it's getting a trade, you're getting your HVAC certification, or whatever it may be, if you want to be an anesthesiologist, but creating opportunities for them and then pairing them with mentors that we call anchors, where they're able to say, hey, I want to be a mayor one day, right? Or I want to understand what it means to go into research and development, right? I want to understand if I have a hypothesis about this and I think that the world would act this way if it had this catalyst, well, how do I get to that point, right? And introduce them to people like Tyler. And so essentially just each one teach one, taking people and giving them a blueprint.
Well, I think I told you one time when we met, I had a pastor tell me, you'll be what you see.
Amen.
And you're setting an example, but you're trying to also quantify this. And so, Tyler, we were talking earlier, you're a PhD student, came by way of California here to Tuscaloosa. Talk about the work that you're doing here and what you're hoping to discover as part of your analysis.
Sure, sure. So I'll start with something you kind of just said. I always say it to myself in a different way, which is that you don't know what you don't know. And so in one way, the way that I see myself being involved in this and the way that this impacts the community is presenting something to these kids by way of opening up their choice sets and understanding, okay, well, there's other options. Like you're saying, not maybe 1 in 100 will get to move on to a professional level, but there's knowledge spillovers that we can teach through sport. In terms of behavioral and attitudinal change. So that kind of brings me to your question, which is that my role and what I'm seeing to do in this is develop quantitative and qualitative impact statements and figure out, okay, beyond just the numbers on paper of X amount of kids went to college, X amount of kids got their GEDs, X amount of kids did not enter juvenile detention, what can I say about behavioral and attitudinal change? Because what we know from a research perspective is that if you're able to influence behavior and attitude, especially in these children we're talking about 13 to 17 years old, we can adapt their cognitions and we can change the way they approach other situations outside of sport. So kind of what Donnie's doing and putting this system into place, this Saban-esque system where, you show up here, we do this. Creating structure for these kids is actually going to be able to adapt those behavioral and attitudinal changes. And if we change the way they're approaching life and the behaviors they're doing and habit forming, we're going to see changes in cognition that spill over into how they show up in the workforce, how they show up in the classroom. And I can sit on my soapbox about this all day, but even when we get into it at the personality level, a lot of work I do is on things that are tangential to sports, like trait level competitiveness. And if we can get these kids to tap into something like their competitive identity, now it's not just, hey, when I show up, I want to beat the kid next to me in speed drills. It's, hey, if you say I need a X score on my SAT, then I'll do that plus 10. And that's what we want to be able to shift. And I think in him bringing me in, that's my goal, is to be able to put this on paper and say, hey, we were able to do these things for these kids.
I think it's remarkable what's happening. I remember I had a coach one time, and I don't know if Mark Twain said this. He attributed to Mark Twain, so I'm going to pass it down and take it as he did. But he said it's a shame that youth belongs to the young. And what he was saying is so many big decisions in your life you have to make that will, your first 20 years will really dictate your next 60.
Come on.
But all these decisions happen at such an immature part of your life where you don't really know that having that structure in place really can protect you from putting yourself in bad positions. By the grace of God, I could have found myself many times in trouble because of the immature actions that I did at different points of my teenage years and college years. And so we're all vulnerable in that way. And that's why I love what you're doing. Speaking of vulnerabilities, one of the vulnerabilities our youth face here in Tuscaloosa, but really our youth face throughout the nation, is gun violence and the proliferation of gun violence. We're not here to talk about attribution. We're here to what can we get our young people to do not to participate and to reduce the chances of them being impacted by gun violence. Let's talk about what you're trying to do with B-Rob. Talk about who B-Rob is and our hope to have, not our hope, we're going to have him on May 22nd to come and deliver a message to our community leaders, but also to our young people who we hope it'll resonate and plant a seed that they can make certain their outcomes are positive. Talk about what you're doing, Donnie, on that.
For sure. Well, Mayor, as you know, every time we talk, we're constantly focused on that 13 to 17-year-old demographic, right? And how can we mitigate crime with them because it's occurring disproportionately, right? A lot of people are familiar, and for those that aren't, I'll give a brief synopsis in terms of what happened with B-Rob. We call him B-Rob, but it's Brian Robinson, the former University of Alabama running back and currently the starting running back for the Washington Commanders. So last year, right before the football season started, Brian Robinson, he was leaving an event. A group of kids followed him, and that's the unfortunate reality, is that this was legitimately a group of kids in that age range from 13 to 17. These kids followed B-Rob. When he pulled over, they approached him on the vehicle. Shots were fired, and B-Rob was a victim of gun violence. B-Rob and I spoke maybe 2 days afterwards. Once we figured out everything was good, he had surgery, and there was no life-ending or life-threatening injuries. We just had the opportunity to just really speak about the brevity of life. And I think that what you see, like you said earlier, it's not just in the city of Tuscaloosa, but it's an issue at a macro level, is that we don't value life. Specifically in the African-American community, just being transparently, there's an anti-intellectual culture, there's an anti-intellectual subculture that we talk to the kids about in this community all the time. Like she said, well, you want to have you want to run a 4.340, but why aren't you equally as competitive with scoring a 36 on the ACT? I don't think those two are mutually exclusive. If you can do one, then you can do both. So with the conversation that B-Rob and I had, we always recognize that the things that we think happen to us, they actually happen for us.
Now, that's a great way of thinking about something.
Come on. The things that we think happen to us, they actually happen for us. And so any situation, again, this is a Sabanism. It's something that derived from his philosophy. But if you're going through a tough situation, you can't waste a failure. It's how Coach Saban coins it. In that situation, it was a failure on society, right? That those kids, they didn't have programs, they didn't have resources, they didn't have the mentorship to show them, hey, there's another way to go about this, right? There's another lifestyle to live. Like you said earlier, when I was their age, I was doing dumb things too, right? But one of those kids, they just made a decision that's going to have them incarcerated for the rest of their lives. And so I think that it's important, it's imperative to acknowledge whenever something takes place with gun violence, specifically when someone is murdered as a victim of gun violence, 2 lives are lost. The person who is deceased and the person who perpetrated the crime. And so I say all that to say, B-Rob and I's conversation was, how do we take the social capital that we have right now, right? Like you said earlier, it sucks that, or Mark Twain that you attributed to, says that it's terrible that youthfulness, could you repeat it for me, what was it?
Yeah, the youth is wasted on the young.
The youth is wasted on the young, right? So traditionally, guys don't have the wisdom to say, man, let me go talk to these kids about putting the guns down while they're still in the NFL. A lot of times it's 20 or 30 years down the road where, okay, now you've been out of Alabama for multiple decades at this point, right?
Yeah.
You don't have the same voice. You might come and try to speak to the community and try to say, hey, I'm a community leader for the city of Tuscaloosa because I played football at the University of Alabama for X amount of years. Well, if that was 30 years ago, no one's going to listen to it. I just finished playing at Bama less than 10 years ago, and they're not going to listen to me nearly as much as they would listen to somebody.
You're
like
an old
B-Rob.
man.
I'm an old man to them. I'm an
Yep.
old man to them. I tell Josh Lanier, which is a guy that works with us here at the lab, I tell him all the time, I'm like, bro, I have already aged out from being able to connect with these guys. So now I'm relying on him because he's about 3 years younger than me to have those relationships with those kids, right? They'll go to him and they'll open up to him and say, hey, man, like, I got this going on at home, or, this situation with my dad, or I'm stressed out about this, or whatever it may be. It could be something that we think of as trivial, or it could be something that's going to change their lives, but them having that comfortability to come to us because they see that, okay, well, we still listen to some of the same music, right? We still go to and watch the same movies. Like, we still understand their culture, but we're wise enough to say, bro, don't do it that way. This is how this got me, right? I tell people all the time that, bro, the dream that a lot of people want in terms of making it to the collegiate ranks, right? In terms of having X amount of offers. I put in hours of work my entire life. I started doing 2-a-days when I was 9 years old. Hours of work. If you compile all of those hours, and I exchange that for a 10-minute mistake, what's the ROI on that? And so getting the kids to understand that, Herb Jones, who we're looking to have some events where he can come back and speak to the community as well. I hate that the Pelicans didn't make it into the playoffs, but it works in the favor of the city of Tuscaloosa because we need to hear him talk about
It didn't happen to him, it happened for us.
It didn't happen to him, it happened for the city of Tuscaloosa. So he could come back and talk to the kids about the importance of financial literacy. Herb has been a huge supporter of what we do at the lab. He actually came into the building one day, popped up to surprise me, and he calls me and he says, D-Lee, why ain't nobody in here getting shots up? I said, what you talking about, Herb? He said, I'm at the lab and nobody's up here getting shots up. He's like, bro, if I had this when I was in high school, I'd be in here every single day. I love Herb because he's the type of guy that, he'll not only say I'm going to support you guys, but he'll actually do the work. We wouldn't have this extra basketball hoop if it wasn't for Herb Jones. So we appreciate you, Herbo, and next year we got to make the playoffs. Tell Zion, get it together. But taking those guys that have that social capital, that are influencers at a macro level, and then being able to tell them, hey, let's work together so that we can lead this next generation.
So real quick, the event's going to be May 22nd.
Yes, sir.
What time?
So we'll kick off at 5 o'clock. Yes,
5
sir.
o'clock,
Yes,
and
sir.
the location?
Yes, sir. So we'll be at the First African Baptist Church in downtown.
And if someone's interested in helping to promote it, contribute to it, be part of it, who should they contact and how?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So you can contact Miss Kathy Randall or Miss Pam Pearson. There's an entire team with Outside the Walls. They've been doing this for several years. It's amazing work they're doing in the community. They're on Facebook as well.
They're two champions.
literally two champions. I just take my hats off to them. They do so much work in this community, and a lot of times they don't get thanked for it enough. But they're just two amazing people that I'm very thankful to be learning from and to be serving with. And like I said, on all the social media, from our perspective, you can check on the Ivy Foundation. We'll be posting updates about the event as well, and as well as some of the stuff that we're doing with the positive ticketing system that we partnered up with the city and the Tuscaloosa Police Department with Chief Blankley and SIBO as well.
Well, we appreciate you. Tyler, we're glad that you chose Tuscaloosa. So when do you think you'll have your PhD ready? When will you be ready to defend a dissertation?
So I'd probably be defending early 2026,
Okay.
which sounds crazy to say now, being that far out, but
It'll be here before you know
It's going
it.
to sneak up.
Well, we're glad you're here in Tuscaloosa. We're glad you're doing the research. My gut tells me, and I know you have to be unbiased in it, is that you're going to see Donnie do a lot of great things for the kids here in Tuscaloosa. I truly believe that. Thank you to both of you. You inspire us. I've always found inspiration in my life here in Tuscaloosa in our people, and both of you validate that inspiration. Thank you for what you do every day. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. God bless you. And thank all of you for tuning in to Tuscaloosa Talks.